Welcome, everyone. I'm Shobhana Jori Verma, the Executive Director of SAPRI. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization founded in 2001 and proudly based in Chicago, Illinois. Founded and led by South Asian women, the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, SAPRI, is committed to bridging gaps and addressing the critical needs of our diverse South Asian American community through a nonpartisan lens. I'm excited that SAPRI and South Asian American Justice Collaborative, SACHCO, are teaming up for the Engaged Community Series, a year-long multimedia initiative featuring monthly webinars and podcast episodes. Together, we'll explore key issues impacting South Asian Americans and allied communities across the US. Our goal is not only to share information, but to dig deeper into root causes like systemic discrimination, misinformation, language barriers, and limited legal access. These are longstanding challenges that continue to shape the lived experiences of our communities. I'm especially glad to share this space with my co-host, Kalpana Pedibotla, the Executive Director of SACHCO, who is also one of our panelists today and will be offering her insight during this important conversation on civil rights, immigration policy, and community protections in today's political climate. We're also honored to be joined by Amol Sinha, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey. Thank you, Amol, for making time to be here. And of course, a huge thanks to our moderator, Sufyan Sohel. Sufyan, your expertise and generosity makes conversations like these possible. So thank you all for being here today. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Sufyan.
Thank you so much, Shobna, for your kind words. And we're so excited to be launching the first of our Engaged Community series. Good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to this joint initiative by the South Asian American Policy and Research Institute, or SAPRI, and the South Asian American Justice Collaborative, or SACHCO. As Shobna kindly said, my name is Sufyan Sohail. I'm a civil rights attorney and a social impact consultant, and I'll be moderating today's panel. We're so thrilled to launch this year-long series, which brings critical conversations on civil rights, community well-being, and civic engagement directly to our communities. Just a couple of quick housekeeping. If you have questions throughout our conversation today, please share it in the Q&A. I'll be monitoring those. And we're just really excited to have you all with us today. For those unfamiliar with our organizing partners, SAPRI is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization established in 2001. Through community-based research and strategic partnerships, SAPRI drives impactful policy change at local, regional, and national levels. It is dedicated to empowering South Asian Americans by advancing data equity and ensuring our communities are accurately represented in public policy. SACHCO is a civil rights and legal services nonprofit committed to advancing the civil and human rights of the South Asian diaspora in the United States through direct legal services, community engagement, and impact litigation. We'd also like to thank the Saba Foundation and In Diaspora for their generous support of this series. This Engaged Community series is designed to create space for South Asians and allies to access knowledge, exchange ideas, and connect with the resources that support justice and equity. Each month, we'll explore one of three core and interrelated themes: know your rights, unpacking hate, and civic participation in democracy. Through conversations with expert speakers, advocates, and community leaders, we hope to foster dialogue and conversation and bring a lot of pertinent information out to all of our attendees and viewers. But before we dive in, a quick note: this session is being recorded and will be available afterward on SAPRI and SACHCO's platform. Again, please feel free to share your questions using the Q&A function, and we'll try our best to get through as many as we can during or after our conversation. So tonight, a panel critical conversation on navigating the early days of Trump admin 2.0. As someone who has spent my career at the intersection of civil rights, advocacy, and movement building, I've seen firsthand how policy decisions translate into real harm for communities. In my work, I fought against anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant policies, defended civil rights in the face of government outreach, and overreach, not outreach, wrong word, and mobilize communities to resist authoritarianism. That experience makes today's discussion all the more urgent. We're not just analyzing policies in the abstract, we're talking about people's lives right now. What does that look like? We have undocumented immigrants who are being rounded up in targeted sweeps, echoing the harshest deportation tactics of Trump's first term. We have law firms and nonprofit organizations providing legal aid to immigrants who are facing direct government retaliation, mirroring authoritarian efforts to silence those who fight back. And just recently, we've seen a number of students, including Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian student in the United States, Mahmoud Khalil, apologies, who's facing deportation under vague national security claims, part of a broader crackdown on international students from certain regions and those who choose to protest policies that the United States government may agree or be aligned with. So to frame our discussion, I want to start with four key points. First, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Many of us remember the first days of Trump's presidency in 2017, when a flurry of executive orders upended immigration policies targeting Muslim-majority countries, dismantling protections for undocumented communities, and fueling fear in our immigrant neighborhoods. Legal advocates, organizers, and communities mobilized to fight back, leading to historic legal battles and a groundswell of resistance. We are now in a new chapter, but the playbook is familiar. The question is, what lessons have we learned from Trump's first term, and how do we use them to prepare for what we're facing and what is ahead? Number two, the administration has already begun rolling out aggressive immigration orders with harsher rhetoric and fewer constraints than before. We anticipate escalated attacks on asylum seekers, increased use of detention and deportation, expanded visa restrictions, and a broader crackdown on immigrant communities. We also expect intensified efforts to silence legal advocates, nonprofits, and activists who push back against these policies. Our panelists today will help us unpack these executive orders, analyze their real-world consequences, and discuss potential legal and advocacy strategies to respond. Number three, why does this discussion matter? These policies do not exist in a vacuum. They shape the lives of millions of people, families separated at borders, workers facing visa uncertainty, entire communities living under surveillance and fear. South Asian communities in particular have often been overlooked in broader immigration discussions, despite being one of the fastest growing immigrant groups in the United States. We must ensure our communities are informed, protected, and empowered to act. And number four, what we hope to achieve. By the end of our discussion today, our goal is to clarify what these executive orders actually do, who they affect, examine their impact in our communities, from visa holders to students to undocumented immigrants, explore some of the challenges and advocacy strategies to push back against these policies, and to equip all of us with the knowledge and tools to take action. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by our two experts, Amol Sinha, Executive Director of the ACLU of New Jersey, and Kalpana Pedabhotla, the Executive Director of SAJCO. Amol, Kalpana, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm so excited for our conversation.
Thanks for having us, Sophia.
Of course. I want to start with something that's very current. This week, we had the first a hearing for Mahmoud Khalil. Amol, the recent detention of Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia graduate student and lawful U.S. resident, has raised significant concerns about potential retaliation against activists. Your organization, the ACLU of New Jersey, has become actively involved in his defense. Could you please provide us with an update on his current legal situation and elaborate on the broader implications this case has for free speech and immigrant rights under these renewed efforts by the Trump administration?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you to you, Sufyan. Thank you, Kalpana, for having this panel. Thank you to Sajko and to Sapri for hosting us. This is such an important conversation, especially for our communities, for many reasons, because I know that our communities are not a monolith. There are different, we fall across the ideological spectrum, and I know people feel very differently, but I think some of the fundamental things that we're going to be talking about here, including immigrants' rights, the rights of individuals to be able to exercise their constitutional rights, and so many other things. Basic humanity and dignity matter to all of us. In the case of Mahmoud Khalil, so let me just zoom out a little bit and explain what happened to him. In March of this year, March 8th, I believe, he was brutally arrested and detained in front of his wife, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, arrested and taken away, ostensibly because of his ideology and his speech. And so what we know was that he was taken away, after accusations that he participated in protests at Columbia University, where he was a student. He's a recent graduate from one of their master's programs. And he was removed by ICE to Elizabeth, New Jersey, briefly, and then he was then taken to a detention center in Louisiana, where he currently is. He was, so just to summarize, he was arrested, detained, threatened with deportation, and threatened to have his green card removed, all because he allegedly holds views that the government finds counter to its current viewpoint. What I mean by that is that he has been advocating for Palestinian rights, and he did so while a student at Columbia. And as we know, the Trump administration has been targeting people who have been pro-Palestinian protesters, especially on college campuses. And Mahmoud is sort of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak. He's the first to be he's sort of a test case for what the Trump administration is able to do. And the issue here is not whether or not the issue here is not whether the First Amendment protections that Mahmoud has apply equally. It's a question of whether or not the government has the ability to make somebody disappear for exercising their First Amendment rights. There's very little discussion about whether or not Mahmoud's speech is actually protected, because I think it is, and it is clear that it is, but it's whether or not the government has the ability to detain somebody, arrest them, and make them disappear for exercising their free speech rights, their constitutionally protected rights. And that, to me, is the core here. And if the government is able to go after somebody and take away their green card for constitutionally protected speech, then the dam has been broken, and then we'll see potentially more ability for the government to go out and go after people for similar protected conduct. And we're already seeing that. We're seeing that with the student at Tufts University. There was a South Asian woman from Columbia University that decided to flee the country. There's been a number of different individuals who have suffered consequences because of protected speech. And so, you asked a question about the status of the case right now. So there are two things happening at the same time. One is an immigration case before an immigration judge in Louisiana, and then the second is what's called a habeas petition in a case in front of a district court judge in New Jersey. Initially, when Mahmoud was detained in New Jersey, he filed his first legal papers, his habeas petition, and he filed that in the Southern District of New York. Because that's where he was arrested and that's where his lawyers were, and they filed in the Southern District of New York. The judge in the Southern District of New York ruled that jurisdiction was not proper in the Southern District of New York. It should actually be in the District of New Jersey because that's where he was detained when the case was first filed. The government continues to advocate that, take the position that the case should actually be in Louisiana, which is where he is currently detained, because he was detained in Louisiana for the duration. We joined the legal team when the case was transferred to New Jersey, and we're still a part of the legal team, and we're sort of local counsel there. And we're arguing that no, New Jersey is the proper place for it, because that's where he was in custody when he filed his first legal papers. And thankfully, the judge in that case in New Jersey has ruled in our favor on the jurisdictional question. We'll see what the appeals around it develop. There's also this immigration case, as I mentioned, in Louisiana, which is about whether or not Mr. Khalil is removable. Like, the judge is going to decide whether or not he can be removed from this country. It doesn't necessarily mean that he will be immediately deported. It just means that that he is whether or not the government has the ability to remove him at some point. And so we'll see what that leads to. All signs point to a judge making a decision on that as soon as tomorrow. And so we are awaiting that decision and simultaneously moving forward with the stuff that's going on in New Jersey. It's a big legal team. We've got the ACLU of New Jersey, the ACLU National, the Center for Constitutional Rights, the CLEAR Project at CUNY Law School, the NYU Immigration Law Clinic, and there are a couple of law firms involved as well. So it's a big legal team with a lot of power, with a lot of expertise, from the jurisdictional questions to the immigration questions to the constitutional questions and First Amendment rights questions. We've got it all covered. And we believe so strongly that the government has violated Mr. Khalil's constitutional rights that we're not going to give up. And I'll just say this: regardless of where you fall on the ideological spectrum on this issue or on any issue, if you care about free speech, if you care about holding our government accountable, if you care about democracy, you should be outraged that the government could be able to make somebody disappear for essentially dissenting from U.S. foreign policy. That to me is the most frightening thing about this, is that the government is trying to silence people simply because it disagrees with them.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the incredible work you all are doing. But if I hear you correctly, if when the new iPhones come out and I protest the increase in prices of the iPhone, and if I am a student here, that's potentially deportable because I'm going against policy of the government of increasing tariffs.
So it's if all goes if Trump had his way, I think that would be that could be a possibility. It's a very scary thought. And I don't want to be overly alarmist here, but it is a scary thought. Like, and people are rightfully afraid that criticizing a policy of the Trump administration may lead to some sort of consequence for them. And that's where we're seeing, some law firms and other institutions buckle under the pressure because they're afraid of consequences for themselves or their clients if they are adverse to the Trump administration. But hopefully, the majority of institutions will stand strong and fight back and push back against any attempt to try to turn our country into a dictatorship instead of a democracy.
Thank you for that. Kalpana, I'm going to pivot to you. We're talking a lot about students, and I've been working with a lot of orgs and receiving calls from a number of students. And we're observing a concerning trend where international students, specifically across multiple United States universities, are having their visas revoked, often with very minimal explanations. I had one call where the student was actually flying from India to the United States, paid his tuition, and when he got here, he was informed at that point that his visa was revoked. Reports indicate that these actions are frequently linked to alleged participation in many social justice issues, including pro-Palestinian activism or minor infractions that the students may have, and are executed through terminations in the SEVIS system. Could you shed light on how SEVIS is being utilized in these visa revocations, and maybe discuss some of the broader implications for international students and academic freedom in the current political climates?
Sure, there's a lot to unpack there, and it's all happening quickly. And I want to talk about that and perhaps come back to some of the things that Amol had said. So first off, with regard to the students, this is rapidly unfolding. As of, I think, about March 22nd is when it started happening. There was the government started revoking student visas, and then they would receive an email saying that your visa has been revoked from the State Department. And then immediately resulting in the termination of their international student record called the SEVIS record that ICE administers. And that effectively puts the student out of status. Now, normally, if your SEVIS record gets terminated, it has to be for an actual reason related to your F1 status, meaning that there was a failure for the student to maintain their status. But this is not what's happening. It's the SEVIS record is being terminated by ICE, and the International Students and Scholars Office, through their designated school official, the DSO, has only a notation that's saying something like either on a foreign policy ground, or because your name showed up in a criminal records check. And then as of just a couple days ago, just other, with no other information. So there's a lack of notice, there's lack of substantive information, and the immediate termination of the SEVIS record is followed by a warning from the DSOs that the students should leave the country right away or face ICE detention and removal. It's striking the fear into the hearts of hundreds, if not now, and the close, I don't know how far it's going because we get the numbers keep going, but there's several hundred students that have been impacted, just given the numbers, because many foreign students hail from China and India. We are for sure seeing this hit Asian students the most, South Asian students as well. And what it's sending them into a place where they're not even having any sort of administrative recourse. Normally, if your status is terminated, the student should be able to seek something called reinstatement and then apply and give an opportunity to be heard. That's not even happening. And the student is pretty much left to try to fight back with very little options to do so, including perhaps filing a lawsuit, trying to seek an immediate injunction from being removed. But there's very little a student can do, and the cost of just doing any of these actions are typically beyond the average international student, and they lose their work authorization right away. This is really huge. We're seeing students in the final days of their PhD programs, people in postdoc programs, in STEM programs from major universities in the United States, everywhere from the University of California system at some of our major schools, to the Ivy League schools, in Dartmouth, to major state schools and other places. It's all across the country. And it's sometimes as little, literally, for like a traffic violation. I've had a student who was driving with an international driver's license, for example, and probably was within the period of time that they were allowed to do so. Charges were dismissed, but then they showed up in this records check, and then they've suddenly lost their status. That doesn't make sense. These are not deportable crimes. I don't quite understand what the policy is, and I think the language that's being used by various government officials, including Marco Rubio, is that these are criminals, these are lunatics. As one thing that I've heard, and like the public needs to know that is not who these people are. All right, and it's for things that people have not even convicted, right? So it's not even convictions for like violent crimes that may be deportable offenses. These are non-deportable offenses, and they're often just not even an offense because it was just simply, an issue that was ultimately dismissed. So it's very concerning. And I do want to come back to some things about Amol, but I want to make sure I answered some of the questions that you had.
You did. Thank you so much. And we'll come back to both of these issues.
Yeah.
And what else I'm thinking about is other challenges that we're seeing, other executive orders. But before we pivot to that, a question we received, which goes in, is, Amol, for clarification, whom does the Constitution and the Bill of Rights protect, specifically the First Amendment? Is it only US citizens, or is everyone who's in this country protected by the First Amendment?
Yeah, that's a great question. The First Amendment protects anyone who is inside the United States. So it's not just citizens, it's people who are within the United States, including permanent residents, undocumented people, and people with visa statuses. First Amendment rights apply to everybody. And so the question is also about like what sorts of consequences can there be for speech? So there are very limited categories of speech that are not protected, and the things that are usually seen as the things that are not protected are things like true threats, like you are actually threatening an individual in a time and a place, or incitement to violence, that you are at the precipice of violence, right? Like, and you're inciting people to take action. None of those things.
Like yelling fire at a movie theater, for example.
Or like, there's an armed mob, they are ready to go, and you tell them that, Amol is the guy that you have to attack right now. And like, so it's something as concrete as that. And those are just, two of the categories of speech that are not protected. Everything else, there's an assumption of protection. And of course, our client, Mahmoud Khalil, was engaging in political speech, and political speech is perhaps the most highly protected in our society, and it has to be the case, because everything that we have, every advancement in our society has been benefited from free speech, right? The reason why we have technological advances and scientific advances and academic advances is because of the right to free speech. It's sort of the threshold, and it can't only be available to select few folks in our country. It has to be available to all.
Thank you.
May I now jump in?
Please.
I've been, as an immigration lawyer, that dealing with asylum claims, one of the grounds for seeking asylum into the United States is if you've been persecuted for your public opinion or your political opinion or your imputed political opinion, right? That is a ground that the United States applies for people who've been persecuted elsewhere. It just feels so remarkable, this moment that we're in, right? What Amol is talking about is persecution for people's political opinions, or even just their imputed political opinion, including people who are liking something like a social media post. That seems remarkable to me. And I just want to say, when I dreamt up this idea of an engaged community series, it was July of last year. It was before the situation we're in now, because I thought it was really important that our communities have this knowledge. They know their rights, they know their histories, they know how to move forward for civic participation and democracy. And now we're seeing such an effort for silencing. When you're talking about moving people to Louisiana, it is for the purpose to cut somebody off from access to counsel. Is to place them essentially in legal deserts where there aren't going to be some of the immigration counsel or the litigation counsel that's required to be able to support those individuals. And that again, I find just incredulous. And so I want to just state that, and I appreciate so much what ACLU is doing, because they are fighting in our courts, but we all need to be fighting also in the courts of public opinion, because this narrative that we are going after criminals and terrorists has got to change. So just wanted to throw that out there.
100%. Thank you so much for that. So I feel it's a blizzard of news every single day. It's really hard to stay on top of new challenges, new orders, new policies. The landscape is always changing. Can you both share, starting with Amol, some of the other just high-level overview of some of the other executive orders or actions that we've seen come out of this administration?
Sure. One of the first that we saw, perhaps the first that we saw, was the Trump administration's attempt to end birthright citizenship. We saw it happen on January 20th, on Inauguration Day, just a few hours after he was inaugurated. And within 90 minutes of that executive order being signed, the ACLU filed a lawsuit to stop it. And the next day, we had attorneys general from many different states, including New Jersey and many others, file in two different courts. So there was one in Massachusetts and one in Washington, I believe. And thankfully, in each of those cases, there's been an injunction. So they have stopped the enforcement of that executive order, at least temporarily, until we figure out whether or not it is constitutional. And so, we temporarily have won those cases, and we'll see what the appellate courts say, but that's where we're at. And so we are, it is, frightening to me that the administration thought that he could even do this, but it is reassuring to me that the courts have said that so far, no, you can't. Any read of that executive order by any legitimate lawyer or constitutional scholar will say it's blatantly unconstitutional. Judges have said that so far, and it is clear to me that any read of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which is the amendment that guarantees birthright citizenship, means that birthright citizenship is a right and not merely a privilege. But one of my fears is that the conversation has already been started, right? Like this idea of birthright citizenship being unjust in our country, or something that was that should no longer exist, has always been sort of a thing that has bubbled up from time to time on the far right of academia and the most conservative movements, and now it's become mainstream. And so the Trump administration has started a conversation, and there are those among us that will now feel that birthright citizenship is a privilege and not a right, and something that has been granted to people unjustly. And so that worries me about the future. And even if the administration does not get its way, which I'm hopeful for, I think it's going to continue to try other ways to chip away at redefining who gets to be an American, and that's very frightening. Other executive orders within those first days included things like trying to further militarize the border and ending asylum. There was an app that people used to seek asylum, and they shut that down. There were executive orders on so-called DEI, sort of ending DEI into the federal government. There was executive orders on gender ideology and things related to basically encouraging discrimination against transgender individuals. And so there are things like that. But then there are other executive actions where they are directing other agencies to take action. And so those are things that will take time to sort of figure out what the harms are actually. So but ACLU has been filing lawsuit after lawsuit, starting on day one. We now have, I think, 28 lawsuits against the administration. We have, I think, over 70 legal actions, including things like freedom of information requests and amicus briefs. And we're not slowing down. In the first Trump administration, the ACLU had filed over 430 legal actions, and that at that point was the most that we've ever filed under any president. And now we're on pace to do at least as much. And one of the things I'll say about this Trump administration versus the first one is that in the first administration, there were the big sort of blockbuster executive order was the Muslim ban. And that was something that came out a week after inauguration. And of course, ACLU and others, our partners, fought back. There was, people might remember the crowds at airports and the organic sort of protests that emerged because people were just so outraged. The Trump administration this time, I think one of their strategies is to flood the zone, so to speak, to do as much as possible and as much damage as possible as fast as possible, so that organizations like mine and others can't keep up. And they're trying to go after so many different things at the same time, including several executive orders on day one. But we spent over a year scenario planning and trying to figure out exactly what it was that the Trump administration would do so that we could be ready for these moments. And so far, I'm happy to say that nothing has totally surprised us.
I was gonna ask, yeah.
Yeah, nothing has totally surprised us. Everything kind of feels like, it's something that we anticipated. But of course, that doesn't lessen the damage, right? Like the damage is still happening, and it's still scary for a lot of people. I will say one thing that has surprised me is the way in which the Trump administration, through executive order and other ways, has gone after law firms. There are law firms that the Trump administration has attacked because they see those law firms as either employing or working with their so-called enemies. And big firms like Paul Weiss and Skadden Arps and some others have made headlines because they have entered into agreements with the Trump administration. And then there are other law firms like Perkins Coie and Jenner and Block and Wilmer Hale that have made headlines because they're fighting back against the Trump administration. So it's an interesting and scary time for sure. The attack on the rule of law should concern us all.
Thank you. And I think seeing how this issue is really galvanizing a lot of lawyers has been motivating, right? Seeing that a lot of lawyers are stepping up and calling to question why their firms are not being as courageous as they would hope they would be in fighting back against these, especially from those that you mentioned. So I'm really interested to see if we can use some of that energy to push back against a lot of the other attacks that we're seeing from the Trump administration. So thank you. Copeland, do you have anything to add on the new executive orders?
I was going to ask Amol if he was surprised by the attack on law firms. I think that's caught us all by surprise. Perhaps it wasn't surprising, the attacks on students, but the universities themselves, and the way that they've been having to fall in line or face loss of significant budgets, and that ultimately harms the universities. The way that nonprofits are getting silenced, like all the kind of levers that would normally be a voice, right? Those levers are being also silenced. So that is for sure concern. I wanted to call out one other thing, and that's the enhanced vetting executive orders that would now impact people's travel in and out of the United States. While it is aimed at non-citizens, and it still has ripple effects. So I know that, and it's also creating a sense of, is it okay for me to travel? I'm a US citizen. Should I carry a burner phone? Should I leave my laptop at home? All of those kinds of concerns. There are still rights that you have, especially, but at the border, it gets a little trickier. And I think that's a big concern. But for non-citizens, there are pretty much no rights at the border with regard to their devices. And I think that that's, I've been giving talks about, well, don't travel. If you're going to travel, you should expect a delay, potentially not being able to come back into the United States. I know that may feel scary for some people who are listening here, and part of what we're doing is ensuring you know your rights, and that's going to be part of the series that we're doing. I'm a citizen. I was born in the United States. I'm not going to carry my US passport to travel domestically. I'm just not. I'm not gonna feel like I have to carry evidence of my birth because I'm suddenly scared about it. And I know that's a scary thing for some people, and people are making the choices that they need to make. But we should acknowledge that these ideas, these enhanced vetting orders, even though they're targeted to particular groups of people, it is having a ripple effect across. And to the extent that you can and feel safe to do it, assert your rights in this moment, because it is otherwise going to be completely continuing to be a slippery slope. I mean, we just heard the president saying, what was it yesterday? I've lost track now, of floating the idea, right? Floating the idea of deporting US citizens to a Central American country. Then doing so immediately after people had already seen Venezuelans return to El Salvador with their heads shaved and held in behind prison. And then you say, I'm floating the idea of sending US citizens to Central America, to El Salvador. It's not, you can see that connection being made in people's minds, and that's about striking fear. So while these orders are guys in our national security, I think we really have to be concerned about the scope and their expansion to beyond sort of like, well, oh, it's just those other people. It's not those other people. It's us. It's our people. So those are I think that those are the things that concern me. The travel ban has not come out yet, but I think that it's fully anticipated that it will. I can't recall the number of countries that got added to it. It's like, I think 4 times the size as it was the first time the first illegal travel bans occurred. And I think that's something that perhaps there's a strategy because everybody's been waiting for it. And in the meantime, we're moving in so many other areas in which we continue to diminish the rights of immigrants in the United States.
Thank you, Kalpana.
One thing that I'll just say to that is, look, on the Kalpana talked eloquently about the visa issue and the students that are facing harm right now. I'll just say that, you know, it's not European students that are getting their visas revoked, right? Like we're seeing mostly Asian American, South Asian students getting their visas revoked, and that's, you know, part of the intention here, right? It's another way to attack Black and brown individuals and people of color generally. Not just it's not just about immigration as a whole, even though that's sort of the frame that we're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you both for that. Interesting, though, I'm seeing a lot of European countries issue travel advisories to come into the United States, though, also. And, you know, back in 2017, we had this 24-hour hotline here in Chicago for people affected by travel-related issues. And it's still active. And the number of calls we've been getting, my phone rings, and I keep forgetting that my phone's still connected to it. And just people who are citizens and students and all of these people who have a number of concerns about travel. So, like, I would argue that the travel ban, in essence, has already started to an extent because they're strengthening their limits of who's allowed in and questioning those who are arriving at the border. And we have a number of questions about that issue in the Q&A, and I'm going to try to lump them together just for a little bit of guidance. The main question is about cell phones. And Kalpana, you talked about it real briefly. If you can share a little bit more about cell phones, the rights of people upon entering the United States internationally, citizens, non-citizens, and how they can best protect themselves. Someone asked about removing social media apps. One person asked about phones being taken away at the airports. My understanding is anyone who's entering the country can have their phone searched without a warrant. And you can refuse to do so, and the repercussion of that can look different depending on your citizenship or visa status, but I would love to hear from you, our expert.
Wish I had brushed up on that because I just did all that a couple of days ago. So if you're not a green card holder, if you do not share any of your devices, you probably will not be admitted into the United States. You are now on the visa applications themselves required to provide your social media handles. That's been actually there for a bit, but now they're for sure scrubbing and screening more on people's social medias. Even if you delete your accounts, I don't know if that really protects you, just because of the way that they can go ahead and go back and look at people's historical information. So I think that's true for non-immigrants. For green card, US citizens, I think you still have to have a warrant, and well, maybe if you know this for sure, at the yeah, thank you. I know there's a well, we'll just put up a link there, but I believe it's true that if you're a US citizen, that you are not required to turn over your device at the border. And I'm not sure if we can confirm that before we're done today or do the follow-up on that. And but having said that, I know that people are still advising to travel without any devices that have sensitive information on it. So somewhat similar to when you're entering China, actually. So I would suggest I think you should assert your rights as a US citizen, but you should be just also concerned about ensuring that you can protect your devices.
Yeah, the thing that I'm trying to share, I don't think I have access to the full. I don't think there's a chat available, but if there's a way for us to share this link with attendees, that'd be great. The thing that I'm trying to share is basically a piece by the ACLU on whether or not what your rights are at the border as it pertains to your electronic devices. I think it's really helpful, and it's something that I've been sharing pretty widely with friends and others who are thinking about traveling, and it gives you some basic guidance. So, yeah.
Thank you both. A lot of questions about H-1B process, elaborating on legal or institutional recourse available to international students whose valid visas are unexpectedly revoked. Kalpana, could you shed a little bit more light on those?
The students right now, their recourse is quite limited. You can try to push back and get a reinstatement I-20. So if that's a student that's asking, they may know what I'm talking about there. And then file for a reinstatement of your F1 status. I will say, number one, the possibility of getting the reinstatement I-20 is widely it's different across all different campuses in the US. So I know that some schools are willing to, some schools are not. We are aware that ICE is, at least in one instance that I've been made aware of, where they are ignoring if that the student had the reinstatement filed, that they are still issuing the notice to appear and seeking to detain them. So that by itself doesn't seem to be enough to protect that student. So individual lawsuits are a possibility. You're arguing there against the violations of your due process rights under the Fifth Amendment, as well as violations of the Administrative Procedures Act. And there are there's complaints that have been widely shared with immigration lawyers who can potentially support those people. We hope that there may be a class action that will be coming that might give greater protections. But at the moment, right now, those are the real options for students. If students leave the country, as some of them have already done, the return to the United States may become quite limited. The opportunity to return may become quite limited. I don't know if this question is in there, but since we were talking about travel into the country, there's a lot of concerns about people who have their parents are green card holders, and this is very true for South Asian families where their parents spend significant periods here, but then they go out of the country for a couple months, and whether they can come back to the US. There's been pressure by the CBP telling the parents to give up their green cards at the border. This actually happened under Trump 1.0. So this isn't necessarily new. This was the MO of the CPP in Trump 1.0, and it's happening again. And I just want to say, you do not have to give up your green card. Do not sign a surrender or abandonment of your green card. You please have your parents, or the parents, if they're listening, tell them that you are not giving up your green card and that you are seeking to continue to be admitted to the United States. Because what happens is they try to pressure them, but there is recourse ultimately. And typically, if you push back, the CBP officer admits them to the US. And they're told a lot of false information, like you've been out of the US for too long, even when they haven't been. Do you really want to stay in this country? Wouldn't you be happier in your home country? Are your children forcing you to be here? So they just say a lot of terrible things and pressure people to give up the green cards. I would ask people to please resist that. And if your parents are traveling in, to consult with a knowledgeable immigration lawyer.
Thank you for that. One last question on travel is, Amol, we were talking about this earlier. What would you advise on those who are working while traveling and need your advice and device?
That's a tough question, and I don't want this to, sound like legal advice. So please don't. I think it's important to talk to your general counsel at your company, or a lawyer that knows the specifics of your circumstances. But if you're traveling and you are worried about being detained and potentially having your device searched, there is some relevant information in the article that I sent around about what to do to take some precautions. I've been talking to people who are choosing to not take work phones or work computers with them on international travel, finding alternative ways to stay in touch or connected, whether through burner phones or other sorts of devices that they may be able to carry with them. For some people, it's just not a reality that they can be without their device for a whole bunch of reasons, and I understand that. In that instance, you may want to take a look at what items you have on your device, what apps you have, and how much sensitive information is on there that you may want to find a way to either deactivate. Of course, there is still a chance that the information is still on your device, and it's hard to totally scrub, but you can only do so much. And I want to make sure that people are taking the precautions that are appropriate for them. So that's why I'll lift up that article again. I think it goes into some detail about what sorts of things you are entitled to, what protections you're entitled to, and some precautions you might be able to take as a result of if you are traveling.
Thank you. Amol, this one's for you. Two parts. One, there's a question about how your organization, so many others, were preparing for this moment. Was it based on Project 2025? Was it based on just past experience and whatnot? And then the second part to it, which I invite you both to answer, is how far does this reach go, right? We're activists. Can the FBI just show up and be like, hey, Sufyan, you're at a pro-Palestine march. We need to, bring you in to discuss all of these things and your views and who you're with and who you support. If they stop me while I'm driving at a public place, what can I do or should not do?
Mm-hmm. On the first question about planning, so we spent a year scenario planning for either a Harris presidency or a Trump presidency, and we outlined the risks, the threats, the opportunities, the challenges that we would face in either. And as you can imagine, we're a nonpartisan organization, we do not take sides and or endorse or oppose candidates. But as you can imagine, the threats and opportunities for civil rights and liberties were very different when it came to a Harris presidency versus a Trump presidency. I'll focus on the Trump part. We published these things, these memos called the Trump memos. So if they're still published online, so you can go to if you Google ACLU Trump memos, you'll find them. But it basically outlined every threat that we perceive from the Trump administration across a whole number of issue areas. So there's a memo on Trump on immigrants' rights and a memo on Trump on abortion rights, voting rights, etc. And we not only outlined the things that we anticipated the Trump administration to do, but also the ACLU's response from a legal strategy, a political strategy, and a community strategy. And so I would encourage people to take a look at that if they're interested. And we based it off of what we were reading in Project 2025, of course, because we knew that that was sort of the Trump administration's playbook, even though throughout the campaign that Trump had disavowed it and tried to distance himself from it. We still knew that there were a lot of people very close to Trump that were involved in writing Project 2025. So we saw we were a little skeptical when Trump was saying that he had nothing to do with it. But then there was also the things that Trump was saying on the campaign trail. We took him seriously, and the things that we saw on in the first administration. And then there was also you know, the motivation that Trump had to stack his cabinet and many other offices with loyalists. So we were fearful, and I think right, that that Trump would, you know, not only try to deploy his own agenda, he would try to stack the people around him with people that were determined to deploy his agenda as well. So there wouldn't be sort of the adult in the room, so to speak, to push back and to say, you know, this isn't right. And we've seen just that, you know, every agency is led by somebody who is loyal to Trump and trying to do his bidding. And so those were some of the things that we were doing in the course of our planning. And I'm so proud that that planning allowed us to pivot into action on day one, right? So of course we did all of that work. Sometimes it felt like, what are we doing this for, right? It was the entire nationwide organization working on this. So my affiliate of the ACLU was working on this in the New Jersey context, and every affiliate across the country was doing it for their own contexts. And sometimes it was like, this is, you know, this is a hard exercise when we have all this other work to do. But we did it, and I'm so proud that we did, because we were ready to go on day one. And the whole nationwide organization of the ACLU, which is 54 affiliates, a national organization, you know, 2,500 staff across the country. We were just, you know, we flipped the switch and we were ready to go. And so it was crucial.
Glad you were able to do it. How about the second part of my question?
Repeat it again. Sorry.
It's I mean, where does the overreach go?
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
it's who, like,
Yeah.
what rights do we have? What rights do citizens have? Like,
yeah, so there are a few different buckets of things that the question was asking about. Look, governments have always tried to silence dissidents. That has been a feature of governments across the world, and it's been a part of the history of the United States as well, where it's not like we don't have political prisoners in the United States. We do. We have people who have been silenced because of their speech, because they have taken unpopular views. But you know, thankfully, the United States does have a tradition of protecting free speech, and we have gotten it right more than we've gotten it wrong. And so that's great. But I do fear what the question implies, which is that we're rolling that back a little bit, and the Trump administration is actively going after people that disagree with them. And we're seeing that with people with in various immigration statuses. But you can imagine how quickly it could evolve into naturalized citizens or citizens being targeted for their speech. And so there's, you know, there's things that we can do to help protect ourselves. And one of the things that I would encourage people to do is to, as Kalpana alluded to before, to know your rights. And I see the little card up behind Kalpana's in Kalpana's frame, to know your rights. And there are so many resources out there the ACLU website has a whole bunch on knowing your rights when interacting with immigration officials, knowing your rights in a protest, like what to do and what not to do in a protest, and knowing your rights when it comes to interacting with police. And so the best thing I can say to anybody that is fearful about encountering police or law enforcement is don't run. I think I start there with all of my Know Your Rights trainings because that can escalate a situation so fast. Your priority in those moments is to save your life and the life of people around you. And the second you run, it can escalate a situation and justify potential use of force by police. And you want to stay out of that. And another thing that I tell people is that your rights don't exist in a vacuum. It's all fine and good when it's written down on paper, and I understand what how strong those rights seem when they're written down on paper. But in the real world, they exist in a context, and sometimes. For instance, when we tell people that you have the right to refuse entry to law enforcement if they're knocking on your door and they don't have a warrant, that doesn't mean that right will be respected, right? That doesn't mean that they won't force entry. And in the instance that they do force entry, the best thing you can do is preserve your safety, and that means not resisting, complying, and trying to remember as much as you can, or if you have the ability to write it down, so that you can protect your rights in court afterwards. And if people are at a safe distance, they have the right to record on their phones. Again, if you're at a safe distance, and what I mean by that is that you should not be interfering with any law enforcement activity if they are arresting somebody else. You can, if you're allowed to be there, if it's a public place, you have the right to record police activity. So those are some of the things that I think we can do to protect ourselves. But the question was asking about how far the reach goes. Right now, we're seeing more frequent instances of overreach and of the government abusing its power. And we're not only seeing it in the individual context where individuals like us or activists might be challenged. It's happening in the institutional context too, with the Trump administration weaponizing grant funding, right, for universities, weaponizing anti-Semitism. And I'm not suggesting that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. It certainly does, and it's something that is probably prevalent on some college campuses. However, I think what the Trump administration is doing is weaponizing it to try to justify getting people in line with a certain worldview that they hold, and that to me is anti-democratic. It's anti First Amendment. It's anti-academic freedom, and we need more voices to stand up.
Thank you, Kalpana.
Room with, because you just lay it out there so easy for people to understand. I just wanted to piggyback just one thought. I mean, like, stay calm. Right? It's a scary time. I've been talking to so many students now who are having serious anxiety and panic attacks. And it is a fear-inducing climate to see ICE agents come to your home, to your dorm, to your apartments. It's can be very, very difficult. I just would want to just say, take a breath, and know you do have certain rights, and encourage you to get either the pamphlet that ACLU has. There's other red cards. Encourage you not to open your door unless they have a judicial warrant. Make them show it to you. And you do not even have to say that you're at home, right? So we have no obligation. If somebody rings my doorbell right now, I do not need to say that I'm home. So that is a way to at least ensure that you're protecting your rights. And it's an unusual situation because you've got ICE showing up in various uniforms that are unclear about who they are, what their designation is. And and they're often not there with that judicial warrant. So 9 times out of 10, you should presume that they don't have it, and therefore that you have no obligation to speak with them. But thank you, Amol, for just reminding us so well about what our rights are. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you both so much. A question in the Q&A, it's, as alluded to earlier, given the Trump administration's targeted attack not only on larger firms and their capacity to take on clients, but also on individual lawyers, as shown by the Dearborn attorney who was detained recently. So how can lawyers and community advocates become better trained to fight back against the threats posed by this administration and ICE, especially in their capacity to represent clients?
Yeah, I don't even know how to unpack that.
So I think basically, like, as lawyers, where can we get the support that we need to be better advocates for our communities and clients? Like Amoli works for the ACLU, where there's a huge network of support, right? Like, I think you're in an immigration space, huge. You have colleagues and collaborators that you're able to pick their brain and learn from and support. But for those who may not be in some of those spaces, how best can they become stronger advocates?
Well, I wanted to say one thing, right? With regard to immigration lawyers, there was specifically an attack on the immigration bar itself. While not an executive order, President Trump issued a memo basically for the purpose, I think, to strike the fear into immigration lawyers to not do what they're supposed to do, which is represent their clients zealously, like every other lawyer, and basically suggesting that if our the lawsuits that we file, that they will be holding them to a higher standard to prevent us from bringing asylum claims. Lawyers are already regulated by our state bars. We already have obligations. We are officers of the court. We have obligations to investigate the facts. But when a president calls out a specific section of our bar and threatens to bring action against them, against our fellow lawyers, I think that is something we have to push back, not just individually, but we have to push back as a bar itself. And I am proud to see that the American Immigration Lawyers Association chose to do exactly that. And I think that that's where the lawyers can help, is that we shouldn't be going it alone. We should be going it in community with each other.
Thank you. Mo,
Yeah,
anything to add?
I would echo that, and also say that, look, it's not just big law firms that the Trump administration is going after. I don't know if folks saw. I mean, this isn't the Trump administration per se, but it's adjacent. There's a congressional committee that is investigating Northwestern Law School and the legal clinical program there because of the clients they've represented. And again, they represented, in particular, I think the letter said that because they represented a pro-Palestinian protester who engaged in civil disobedience, they are being investigated, and their whole clinical program is under attack right now. And so it is so concerning that we're living in a country right now where the government is putting pressure on people, on law firms and legal clinics to take or not take a certain type of client. It is undermining the whole principle of the law, which is that everybody has rights, that even actors that we disagree with have legal rights. And it sort of undermines the rule of law as a whole. So it's not just big firms. It's legal clinics, law schools. It's the immigration bar, as Kalpana was saying. They're trying to strike fear into people. And another thing that they did was they actually the Trump administration issued guidance saying that they were going to request that every agency demand in court that any institution that chooses to sue the agency has to demonstrate that they can pay attorney's fees to the Trump administration if the Trump administration prevails ultimately. And so what that means is an organization that may not have a whole bunch of money, if they want to challenge the Trump administration on a constitutional claim, they're going to have to show that they can put up potentially millions of dollars in bond or some other form if the Trump administration prevails ultimately. And this is like even if the executive action doesn't withstand judicial scrutiny, like even if it doesn't prevail, what's worrisome about it is that I'm sure there are a number of organizations and institutions that have thought twice before they are suing the Trump administration now because they're worried about their own about the implications on their own finances as a result. So they're trying to chill organizations from challenging them. And because, when they know that they can't win on the merits, they're trying to change the rules of the game. And that's what we're seeing a lot of right now.
Thank you both. So quick recap, and if I'm missing anything, let me know. American democracy is eroding. Law firms and universities are cowards. There's a lot of fear in the American public from traveling and protesting and all these other issues. And it's just a scary time right now. And as we wrap up, what I'd like to talk the next couple of minutes about is hope and how we can all do our parts to support one another, to see each other, to stand up for one another. So how can people like my parents, right, Indian immigrants, who usually just mind their own business, they'll vote, don't really engage in protests or activism, but are caring about what's happening, how can they support either advocacy or other efforts that are happening on the ground? There's so many non-lawyers out there who want to do something, who want to step up. What are some resources or what are some ways that they can show up? Kalpana?
So first up, thanks for giving me a minute to speak about on that. I did want to say, I don't think the law firms and universities are cowards. I think that they are being pushed into very difficult corners. And there are some law firms and universities that are able to push back more than others. But the kind of power that is coming down on top of them, I think it shouldn't be underestimated. I just want to say that. I have my opinions.
I was generalizing, but
and there are some that I wish they had done more, right? That they hadn't
Sure.
just quickly capitulated when there was clearly grounds for them to be able to potentially to prevail. In terms of, why do we have this series itself was an educational opportunity, but also I hope that over the next year, people will be introduced to many of the different organizations that our organization, SACHCO, is collaborating with, from all the way from SAPRI to now, with Amol participating here on behalf of ACLU, just to learn more about what's going on out there and figure out ways to support them. Through your efforts voluntarily, financially, things are being cut off, right? The monetary avenues for organizations, especially organizations that might have a diversity mission, may no longer be able to access funds. So everybody needs help. So I hope that that's something that people really take to heart. Not just for our organizations, we'll be very happy to take more money, but for all of the ones that are here trying to do this job of amplifying this moment and the dangers of this moment and trying to push back and fight back. In terms of how you can get involved if you're interested in the mission of SACHCO, we are looking for volunteers, and we hope to bring out a hotline where we can offer people opportunities to hear more. I think that advocacy should still be done. One thing, we're a nonpartisan organization, but you, the audience, you can reach out to members, your elected officials. They still are there. And whether they reflect your political viewpoint, they should hear from you if you disagree with what's happening today. And I think that's super important. I do not believe ultimately that this is what people voted for. I do not believe ultimately that they also understand just how much the level of civil rights are being eroded, and that it is not just for some narrow sets of minority groups in the United States. It is a broader assault on people's civil rights. And I think it's important for people to become aware of that, and take that message out to your family and your friends and your, uncles and aunties and parents. It's important that they all hear about it.
Thank you. Mole, Kalpana shared some ways people can engage, give back, support. What I'd love to hear from you is, what are you seeing in terms of hope? What's giving you hope?
Yeah.
We're dealing with these things on a daily basis, a broad range of issues. So what keeps you going and what gives you hope?
Yeah, this last weekend, I had the chance to participate in one of those the hands off rallies. I was a speaker at one of them in New Jersey, and I had colleagues speaking at other ones. Um, in New Jersey, we had tens of thousands of people show up to these rallies. There were over 100,000 people in New York City. I'm sure there were tens of thousands of people in major metropolitan areas all across the country. But then, even in rural communities, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people showing up in those spaces. All in all, I heard that there were like 3 to 4 million people across the country that showed up for these hands-off rallies. That's 1% of the population on a Saturday, getting up and deciding at the same time that we were going to push back. And that's a fraction of the people that have an opinion about what's going on right now and feel motivated. So I am hopeful that what Kalpana said is true, that this is not what people voted for. This is something outside of the norms, the traditions, and the rights and the expectations that we have for our country. What other things that give me hope is the beyond the activism, the different ways in which leaders are pushing back right now. So look, again, I'm a Jersey person, so I have to cite local people here, but Chris Eisgruber is the president of Princeton University. He has been pushing back on academic freedom, and he has a lot to risk by doing so. But he's doing it over and over again. And he wrote a piece in The Atlantic that talks about why we need to all stand up for academic freedom right now. He was on a couple of podcasts saying that he's pushing back. And it's bold leadership like that we need more and more of, and we're seeing it in different spaces. So I'm grateful for that. But let me just say that, I know all of us are lawyers here. The law is just one tactic. It is one tactic that we can use to preserve our rights and push back. What we need is a multitude of tactics to push back across all fronts. So for the non-lawyers that are listening, it's important to do some of the things that Kalpana mentioned, including calling your lawmakers, making sure that you're making your voice heard, showing up in the streets when there's a protest, making sure that you're doing so safely, but doing it, and educating your friends and family. There are a lot of people, as you mentioned, that are not fully aware of what's going on, and I think it's important for us to play the role of educator, and inform people about what's going on, and sometimes it's necessary to have tough conversations with people that we love in order to come to a common understanding of humanity and dignity, and make sure that we're all aligned.
I love that. And you both give me a lot of hope. And so thank you both for joining us today. And just seeing all the different ways that people are pushing back, whether it be through creative writing or showing up to the protests and marches that you mentioned, or learning about just different people who are living around them and the challenges that they're facing, and empathizing and seeing people. I think there's just so many ways for us to be present and show up for all of those around us. And even just seeing a lot of the ending questions and comments in the Q&A, we will be following up with feedback. One lady offered to assist with supporting with mental health and function of our young people, right? There's all these impacts that we don't always realize and understand, and how the increased fear and hate and discrimination may impact us and our community members. So that's something we can definitely share as a resource. And people want to get engaged. There's ask for WhatsApp groups, and how can people show up and help each other out. So we'll be sharing a number of resources to all of you who've registered after in the next couple of days. So just keep an eye out for your email. I've also dropped in the link to the ACLU's Know Your Rights page in the chat. So you should all have access to that, but it has a number of different Know Your Rights guides, from protests to those who are undocumented, to stopped by the police at the workplace. So please utilize those and share those resources with those in your network. And I just want to thank you all so much for joining us again for tonight's conversation. And we hope this was an insightful and engaging start to our Engaged Community series. Before we wrap up, just a few more quick notes. I'm going to drop
Vivian, you want to mention the next event that's coming up? Because
Yes, I will.
that is an actual full-on Know Your Rights program that we're doing.
Absolutely. But before I do that, SAPRI is currently conducting a live survey to better understand the experiences of South Asian immigrants. Your voice is important, so please click on the link I dropped in the chat or on SAPRI's websites. And our next panel, as Kalpana kindly reminded me, is coming up on April 24th at 6 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Central. Standing Up for Our Rights with Law Enforcement and ICE will be moderator with Indira Kara and panelists Zara Bilu and Gulmeet Galhotra. And you can register using the Eventbrite, which we will be emailing out as well. And unless it gets dropped into my notes, I can drop it before we all leave. But if not, we'll email it out, and keep an eye on social media. And please just spread the word. This will be recorded and shared across websites and social media networks. We're trying to get this information out to as many people as possible so that we're all better prepared. And thank you again for joining us. And I'm going to drop this. Oops, nope. Give me one quick second. There you go. And again, thank you all for joining, and we will see you next time. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much.
Good night.